We have to talk about Peanut the squirrel in the context of the dangers of something we've talked a lot about in the past on this channel, Malum Prohibitum crimes. Crimes that are simply crimes because they've been invented by legislators and bureaucrats, having no connection whatsoever to morality. We need to discuss how these Malum Prohibitum crimes, which are everywhere, all over the country, are giving far too much power to unelected bureaucrats and their handmaidens in law enforcement, and the tragic consequences of what happened with Peanut the squirrel. The killing of Peanut the squirrel by law enforcement officials in New York is an illustration of this greater, broader, bigger problem we suffer from here in the United States, including entirely in the context of the right to bear arms and unconstitutional gun controls. Stay tuned. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of Israel Disarmed: What the 10/7 Attacks on Israel by Hamas Teach We Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. All right, folks, so most of you are aware of the story over the weekend of Peanut the squirrel and his friendly brotherly raccoon, who were both killed by law enforcement after a search warrant was executed and a 5-hour search of the homes of animal welfare rescue workers who basically had an animal sanctuary in New York State, just outside of Elmira, I believe. And they responded apparently due to an anonymous complaint, maybe even from out of state. I think the investigation is still going on. But there was an anonymous complaint about this squirrel who had become sort of an internet sensation on social media as the face of the animal sanctuary that was raising money as a nonprofit to fund the protection of these animals that had been brought in to this home and sanctuary. And Peanut the squirrel had been found by the owner and manager, if you will, of the home and also of the sanctuary, because Peanut the squirrel's mother had been run over by a car and he was left on the side of the road, and the sanctuary brought him in and raised him from basically a super small baby. But he became kind of a family pet and so on and so on. So what happened, of course, is that for some reason, supposedly because there was concern about having an animal, a squirrel without a license or something like this, an anonymous phone call was apparently made. A series of anonymous complaints was apparently made. That's at least what the reporting seems to be so far. To animal welfare conservation officers in the state of New York. And at some point, after a judge signed off on this warrant, they sent multiple law enforcement agents with firearms and gloves, apparently, to able to protect themselves from an animal attack, supposedly, into this home. And according to the reporting, there was like a 5-hour search of this home and sanctuary. They took a raccoon and they took Peanut the squirrel, and then they killed them both. With no trial, with no hearing, with no lawyer involved, nothing. They killed them supposedly because they wanted to test them to see whether or not they had rabies. Now, the point of the story is not just about a squirrel and a raccoon. The story to me that has concerned so many Americans is this is a classic example, a perfect example of the problems of today's government overreach, of how stupid issues, such as whether or not you have a pet squirrel in your home, literally rise to the level where law enforcement officers and a judge have to get involved to send in a team, armed team, to do a 5-hour search warrant of a home because of a squirrel and a raccoon in an animal sanctuary. In addition to the fact that this should not be happening because it's a waste of time and resources, it also speaks to mispriority of law enforcement in America. Why on earth, where we have a wide open border, we have Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment buildings in Colorado, according to the reporting. We have violent thugs all across this country. We have gangs and on and on. And our law enforcement officers, at the behest of the politicians and unelected bureaucrats, are literally spending my money and your money and our time on this sort of nonsense. Now, the reason why this is so significant to the Second Amendment community and the gun control issue is for at least two reasons. One is it shows the danger of malum prohibitum crimes. We've talked about this before, which is malum prohibitum crimes are those crimes that are simply crimes because the legislature says so. A classic example that is basically every example of modern day gun control law is a malum prohibitum crime. And a malum prohibitum crime is distinguished from the classic crimes of what are known as malum in se. Now, you don't need to worry about the Latin here, because I'm going to make it real simple. All malum prohibitum means it's only outlawed because it's just said so by some king or by the government or by a legislature. That's all it means. Malum in se means essentially evil in itself. Malum in se crimes are what you think of as a crime and I think of as a crime. Murder, rape, robbery, theft, assault, battery. These are obvious violations of the human condition that is just instinctual in living as humans. Those are malum in se crimes, what everyone understands to be a crime. All these other nonsensical crimes, that the barrel on your rifle is too short, that you have a barrel, that you have an improper barrel shroud, or whatever it is, these are simply crimes because someone said so. Likewise, to me, having a squirrel in your home is how that's even a crime. But if it is a crime, it's a malum prohibitum crime. Nevertheless, the danger to these malum prohibitum crimes is it gives excuses to the deep state bureaucrats and law enforcement officials to do bad things to you over nonsensical reasons. Now, this is not the first time we've seen this before, and I'm just going to allude to the 1992 attack by the ATF and the U.S. Marshal Service and federal law enforcement involving Ruby Ridge and Randy Weaver. Now, we don't need to belabor this point beyond to say, as you may recall, and if you don't, you need to look up Ruby Ridge and the siege of Ruby Ridge, where because of really a nonsensical arrest warrant that was issued by virtue of an entrapment scheme by federal law enforcement agents over a guy living in the mountains in Idaho, who gives a crap, right? Like, why? Who cares? Nevertheless, there was an entrapment scheme over the length of a barrel of a shotgun or a rifle or whatever it was that gave rise to an arrest warrant. And in the process of effectuating this arrest warrant, without getting into all the dirty details, you don't need to. The bottom line is, in the process of effectuating this arrest warrant, federal law enforcement killed Randy Weaver's wife, killed his son, and killed his dog over a malum prohibitum crap crime that, again, is only a crime because someone said so. There's no moral component to a rifle or a shotgun barrel that's too short. Maybe good or bad, but has no moral component. And this Peanut the Squirrel is the same concept. We are giving these people too much power by creating too many laws. And again, it's something that the Soviet Union used to say, their officials over there, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. If you have so many laws on the books in the United States, there's no way for you to be able to comply with all of them because you can't possibly know them. Now, I want to let you know, to give you a personal example. Very few people in America know as much law as I do, okay? It's just the way it is, okay? The law firms I've worked at, the cases I've worked on, there are not a lot of people that know as much about American law as I do. There are some, very few. Now, my only point is not to sort of pat myself on the back. That's not the point of what I'm about to say. The point is this. Despite what I know about the law, I have retained for myself and my law firms over the years everything from bankruptcy lawyers to criminal lawyers to ERISA lawyers, right? To employment lawyers, to unemployment lawyers, to accountants. The point is, despite the fact that I know all this law, I and my law firm over the years have literally retained dozens of other lawyers to make sure that we comply over the years in various situations with all sorts of laws. Why? Because even I don't know all the laws in all these different areas, pension laws and employment law. Craziness. Point being that if Mark Smith needs to retain all those kinds of lawyers over the years to make sure that I have complied ahead of time with the law so I don't run afoul of anything, copyright laws, intellectual property laws, and so and so and so, what is an ordinary person in Elmira, New York, running an animal sanctuary going to have to do? They're like defenseless in this world of laws. There's no way they can conceivably even know what the laws are. If Mark Smith can't figure out all the laws without help over the years, guess what? What is an ordinary American going to be able to do? It's totally unfair and a scam, in my opinion, and totally wrong to have all these laws to ensnare people in this kind of nonsense. And the consequence of being ensnared in this stuff is extremely dangerous because people can get killed. You can lose your property, and heaven forbid there was something illegal in the home that was searched for 5 hours. If he had an illegal gun, an illegal magazine with more than 10 rounds, he had some other illegal thing that he doesn't even know is illegal for all. Who knows, right? He could have had grandpapa's old gun, whatever it was. None of that apparently happened. I'm glad. But the point is, they spent 5 hours searching his home because of a squirrel, based on an anonymous complaint from out of state, apparently. This is the problem. This also speaks to the red flag issue, of course, where you have an anonymous complaint, they violate your rights, and then only after they violate your rights, they give you some sort of due process, which I totally oppose, but that's a whole separate point of a separate video. So again, what this all teaches us here in America in the gun control space, the Second Amendment space, is the only reason why these anti-gunners enact gun control laws is to create a set of a bunch of web strands to try to capture as many law-abiding Americans in them to in turn disarm them and take away their rights. That is what this is all about. And that's why, in my view, the most important thing we can do is to eliminate as many Malum Prohibitum laws that have nothing to do with morality. They're just written down on the paper just because. And again, this is an example of, and then this the squirrel situation is a classic example of this because it gives the excuse to unelected bureaucrats and law enforcement and judges and the like to go out there and target people over nonsense. And that's not, of course, to get into the fact that this is a total misallocation of resources, because to me, if you got the resources and bandwidth to go out there and harass some dude over a squirrel, then you ought to be, you ought to be kitting up and get yourself out there on the border and protecting Americans against violent thugs, violent terrorists, and criminal gang members. You've got to go man up and go deal with that. Don't be messing with some ordinary person in middle-class America over a squirrel and a raccoon. You should be embarrassed for having to do that. I know I would be entirely embarrassed if you said, Mark, you've got to go do that. I'm like, you guys are kidding me. Are you kidding me? You're wasting my time to go after that nonsense? No excuse. I understand people have jobs. They have to pay their bills. I get that. You have no choice. You got sort of a paramilitary, semi-military setup where you have command and you command and control, and they tell you to go out there and effectuate a warrant on a home. You don't got a choice because it's your job. But nevertheless, if I were doing it, I would be utterly embarrassed to say that I had done this. Even though it was legal, allegedly, even though it was fine, even though I was doing my job, I would still be embarrassed. Nevertheless, I think this is about the system, not any individuals in place here, but the system is screwed up and there's too many laws on the books. And again, all gun control laws, in my opinion, are really these Malum Prohibitum crimes just because they say so. There's nothing inherently immoral in my view, or in anybody's view, frankly, about having a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds, for example. There's no moral component to that. It is simply outlawed in some jurisdictions because they say so. And this peanut the squirrel situation is something you ought to focus on, because whether you think about like the squirrel or not like the squirrel, that's not the issue. It's the overarching broader point that's being made about the over-legalization, the over-criminalization of the society, and the weapons that it gives to the deep state enemies of freedom should not be lost on any of this. All right, folks, well, hope you learned something here today. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. We're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers. It's working hard to get there. We're ways away, but we're working hard. Make sure you follow me on X at 4Boxes Diner. And by the way, it looks like I'm supposed to be on Fox News sometime late on election night. So, I'll keep you informed as that progresses. There's a lot of moving parts when you're dealing with breaking news in the election. So I don't know exactly the right time or the topic right now. But it looks to be the case late on election night, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, because of a lot of breaking news going on over there. So I'll keep you informed on the internet, on social media, and on X as that develops as well. All right, folks, so that's it. So look forward to seeing you again very soon here at the 4Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.